Welcome back to the Joyful Mate podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher, and this is part of my behind the scenes journey on writing a book on happiness, me and my happiness. Actually, not sure of the title, but anyway, that will do for now. Me and my happiness, and the Joyful Mate podcast is to take you along the journey and to be part of this book writing experience. I'd love your feedback and input as you listen to the episodes and listen to me write my book in a spoken way. I'm not a writer, so I'm doing it my way. I'm speaking and allowing transcribers to take notes, and then I will get help with editing, I think. So I just wanted to, this is a segue into episode number 7. Episode number 7 is an interview with Louise Fitzgerald, who's a intuitive guidance coach, and we have a discussion around intuition. And the reason why I'm bringing this onto the Joyful Mate podcast, I recorded it on me&my Health Up, which is my other podcast. The reason why it's on this podcast is because I've realized that we experience less joy and less happiness because we are so anxious, we are so busy, and in order to experience joy and more joy and more happiness, we need to slow down. Our intuition comes to us when we slow down, and then what happens when we get the intuitive guidance to say there's something here that you're holding on to that you need to look at and pay attention to and grow and learn and thrive by addressing it. But what happens is we feel anxious, and that makes us keep running, and therefore the more we run, the more we avoid, the more we fear and hold on to that fear, the more we're not going to experience happiness and joy. And so this is a breakthrough moment I'm having in the book, and I'm sharing it with you. And so this is a segue into the conversation I'm having with Louise Fitzgerald. This is the conversation, the previous episode, number 6. I share my insights as to how my thinking around the intuition and how it's helping us to find more joy and happiness in life. So that's episode number 6. If you haven't listened to that, go to episode number 6 and then listen to this current episode. And I'd like to welcome you into the discussion I'm having with Louise Fitzgerald. Welcome on the me&my Health Up podcast. How are you, Louise?
I'm great. Thank you for having me here today.
It's a delight to have you on, and particularly I'm excited about this subject today. I haven't had any expert on intuitive wisdom, and
Yes.
I'm really keen for you to enlighten the listeners on this intuitive guidance approach to, I guess, making life decisions and just leading. It's a bit of that self-leadership as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, without diving into the details, but that self-leadership is a very interesting word that you've used, because it is really about coming back to that trust within yourself. And I think particularly these days, we were just talking about it before we jumped on, but it's so busy and it's such a, modern technological world, and we can get so caught up and so pulled away from ourselves that very much it's about, coming back and to our intuition and to our trust within ourselves.
Yeah, fantastic. I just thinking, I'd love you to share your background as to how you've arrived at what you're doing today, just so the listeners can get an understanding of how you've come across leading other people in this space.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'll tell the story as quick as I can, but essentially, since I was little, I sort of knew I could kind of pick up on things that other people couldn't. Even had sort of some weird incidences of seeing my brother in a car crash one night, and then he was 2 weeks later. And so there was always something going on, a little bit kind of like, oh, I don't understand what this is, but sort of went on with life. And I think in my 30s, I realized I was picking up on information about things and realized it could help people. And so I sort of never thought I would do it for work, but here we are, where it was kind of this thing where I realized that someone would be talking about a situation or a problem that they had, and I could kind of trace back the origin to what that was. So if someone was saying, I don't know why I'm not getting a promotion at work, it's just not happening, right? So that's what they can see. And I could trace it back to, okay, they're struggling to speak up. Why? And then I could trace it back a little bit further and see that something that happened to them in high school, maybe it was doing a speech in front of the class, and they made a mistake and people laughed at them, like that can be the root cause. So it's really helpful to kind of understand how our present is being affected by our past. So in many ways, what I unintentionally end up doing is a lot of kind of trauma-based work. Trauma, I think, is thrown around a lot these days, and people tend to think it needs to be this big, difficult thing that happened, like a big car crash or something like that. But it doesn't. It can be simply that a teacher said something to you in school, or, maybe you missed the school bus one day and had this terrible day, and it can really affect us right now and our future.
Incredible. Have you sort of, do you know what it is about you? Is it I remember watching the movie Sixth Sense. And so, I guess that's what we're talking about here. And
Yeah.
you've really tapped into it from an early childhood.
Yeah. Yes. But also, it's funny because I think a lot of movies like that made me think it was more obvious than it was. So I didn't realize necessarily that it was happening to me, because the movies make anyone with abilities like that, or the show Medium with Patricia Arquette, or anything like that, they make it seem a lot more obvious. So when it doesn't look like a movie and you're just sort of getting information about people, you're just like, oh, I'm good at guessing.
Yeah.
So I think it was through getting feedback from people about, hey, how do you know that? And then I was getting the confirmation that what I was saying was accurate. And so I started to kind of dig into it a little bit more. And but I believe everyone has these intuitive knowings. So I sort of say it's like, Michael Jordan's sort of probably was pretty good at basketball, and then he practiced it. And so some people are good at cooking and then they practice it and they can become a really good cook. So it's kind of the same. But I do believe that you don't need someone like me. You can tune into this. And that's sort of more what I help people with now, is not telling them what's going to happen to them or things of a predictive nature, because I think it's quite disempowering. I'm very much sort of helping them heal that past to help them understand their present, to get them to that future.
Okay, I think that's a great segue into what I'm really keen to explore. Is because what I really want for the listeners is how can we empower them and to tap into this sixth sense? So how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, that's 100% what I'm really keen about. And I'm very much sort of against that kind of predictive, people like me with abilities like me taking that power away from people, I think. So what people can do to tune more into that intuitive knowing, which we all have, is taking these moments to get away from the go nature of the world, which I believe is, what you help people with, and all of your guests help people with, is like, how can we take those moments of self-care or take those moments of pause? One simple example: in the morning, a lot of us wake up and pick up our phone. And that simple action is tuning into the world before we're tuning into ourselves. So the first thing we do in the morning is we tune into the world before we tune into ourselves. And so that in and of itself, if we can just switch that, right, and wake up and say, open the blinds, get some light in our eyes, and go, how am I feeling? How did I sleep? How do I feel today? Because let's say you wake up and you're feeling a little bit anxious, then you can go, well, why am I feeling anxious? But the trouble is, if we pick up our phone first and we feel anxious, well, I don't know, is it because I saw my friend Sally's post about she's getting married and I'm not getting married, or someone got a promotion and I didn't get a promotion, or someone's on a holiday and I want to be on a holiday? Do you know what I mean? So I think that simple act of just tuning into ourselves first is one example.
So not to pick up that phone first thing in the morning.
Yeah, which is hard. I still do it.
What do you recommend as some good alternatives in terms of enabling the listener to tap into themselves and tuning?
Yeah, so you mean outside of that one example of like the phone, how else can we do it throughout the day?
Yes, Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it is. So there's tools that we can use that actually help us regulate our nervous system that can also help us tune in. So it's kind of a double whammy, right? Because we're sort of calming ourselves in the moment. But for example, a lot of listeners are probably sitting behind their desks and behind computers throughout the day. And again, this is why words like trauma can sound so big, but also we don't think the things that are making us stressed are making us stressed. So out in the wild, for example, if there was a cheetah chasing an impala, the impala recognizes that as a threat and it runs off, and it is a very much life or death situation. We have the same operating system within us, but our threats aren't cheetahs. Our threat could be an email from our boss asking us to do something, because our system is still the same and it's going to go, oh my gosh, and it goes into fight or flight, and we're sort of set off into an anxiety spiral. So if we can, behind our desk throughout the day, we're getting these constant emails, we're actually kind of getting constant threats. We need to take constant pauses. So even if we just go, okay, every time I go to the bathroom, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to release my shoulders and I'm going to relax. If we made that one small change, we're doing a couple things there, right? We're regulating our nervous system, we're reducing our stress, but we're also tuning into how we feel. Because if I go to the bathroom with that intention of taking a breath, I'm going to notice my shoulders are up around my ears, or there's a lot of tightness in my back. So all these little actions, they might not seem like it, but the more we tune into our body, we start to get connected more into, why are my shoulders tight? It must have been that conversation I had before. Okay, what about that made me anxious? So we can get kind of curious. Then we start to understand how we operate in the world a little bit more. So then I'll just jump to kind of the end solution of how we can get to with this, is that when in the future we're in a situation, let's say someone's going on a date, right? And they go, oh, my shoulders are up around my ears. I'm familiar with that. That reminds me of that time I was at work and I was anxious from that conversation. So something here is similar. That's how the intuition starts to work, because it usually runs through our body. That's why it's called gut feeling. We can start to tune into our body and notice the connection between the different situations in our lives, how they make us feel, what it means, and then we've got different choices. Hopefully that kind of makes some sense.
100%. Like
Yeah.
just relating to what you said at the very start was around the amount of stimulus that we take in from scrolling through the phone and seeing everyone's highlight reels, and straight away we're taking in all this input, and then we continue to take in input, like, we get the boss's call, boss's email, we get a call from our partner, can you pick up this, can you do this? And so this stimulus is just, I guess, driving, as you mentioned, that fight or flight system. And there's no pause or reflect. And like, I'm thinking, so in terms of to have output, we need to have input, we need to process the input, and then do an output. Whereas I'm thinking, in this constant stimulus, we've got all this stimulus coming in. We're not pausing. And so the output, it can only be hardwired output.
I know. Yeah, it's like blowing a balloon, right? And it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And if we're not letting any of that air out, eventually it pops. And this is where we do see like chronic illness and things like that can kind of come up from that overstimulated nervous system. Because even as you're saying, like the output, if we go back to the example of the cheetah chasing the impala, let's say it gets away, will shake its body. It will, and it's also not thinking about, God, remember when that cheetah chased me last week? Or like, oh, I wonder if a cheetah's going to chase me tomorrow. They don't have that. We do too. So it makes it kind of worse, right? Because not only are we not having the shaking of our body or the exhale or the crying or from the constant input of threats throughout the day, we've also got, unfortunately, the brain that can future project and past reflect. So that's why overnight we're thinking about the boss's email, or this is happening, or so we're quite stuck in a predicament. We're more advanced, but we're more stressed.
And have you got any ways, because you mentioned the best way to start the day is not to look at the phone.
Mm.
What are some good alternatives to not looking at the phone to really start that day so that you've got a good understanding and you're connected inward? You connect inward
Yeah.
first before outward. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, I'm the first to say it's not easy. I still, have days where I do pick it up. But I think if we think of habit stacking, which I'm not sure if that's been covered on the podcast, but just to quickly cover it, habit stacking is where we've got like an existing thing that we do and then we add something onto it. So when I have a morning coffee, I'm going to also pack the kids' lunch, right? That could just be an example of habit stacking. We could say when I have my morning coffee, I'm going to say a positive affirmation. So that's how we can add something on positive. But if you think about this example of the phone, we're negatively habit stacking because we're waking up and when I wake up, I pick up my phone. So we just kind of need to swap it out for like a positive habit stacking. So one that's really great is to wake up and open the blinds because then we're getting light in our eyes, which really helps with circadian rhythm. It helps with our sleep. So we're already helping our sleep that night by getting the light in our eyes right away. And it's just giving us that pause. And the longer we can not check our phone, the better. I've heard an hour and a half, but again, I know that's not really possible for most people. So any delay that we can. So let's say we open up the blind, we get light in our eyes, we take a pause, and we sort of just move on with the day. So we go to the bathroom, maybe we splash some water on our face, which is another nervous system regulation tool. And then we start with breakfast or go for a walk. All of those actions will be, we're more in our body. We're less in our mind. Because as soon as we're on our phone, I don't even know if you know this, but we also hold our breath. So if the listeners are, they can literally practice this, but it's notice the next time that you're scrolling, just try and catch yourself at some point. You're probably holding your breath and you're probably holding your body. And so even that stance that we're in where we're scrolling in our phone, our body's actually in kind of like signaling to our body, to our brain, that we're in a bit of a threat. So it's not great. And again, I do it too. So it's just about trying to find a few ways that we can kind of swap out of it.
It's just incredible how we've gone from, pretty much a non or very low technology life to how quickly technology is now running our lives.
It blows my mind. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I think back at my childhood, and it was very much, we didn't have phones, for example. There was no mobiles, very few computers. Computers
Yes.
weren't written around. We had a television.
Yeah.
But you couldn't choose what you wanted to watch, right? So you ended up not watching it because of stuff that you weren't interested in.
I know.
And so it was only very, very rare you'd find a program that you liked and you'd sort of make some time for that. Most of the time you're doing your own things just because the way in which technology just wasn't running our lives. And you look at it today and it's controlling our lives.
It's everywhere. And even, it's such a great point. Like even as kids, it was kind of like, if you didn't have anything to do, there was no kids around or whatever, you're probably just sitting there staring at the grass. So we're already kind of doing mindfulness a little bit. But even the TV example is funny because I think about Friday night movies. They were the same, at least in Australia, they were like the same movies all the time. It was like Batman and then it was a Tom Cruise movie or whatever it was. And so you just had to watch it. But you even had ad breaks and you had to sit through the ad breaks. So, it's so different now and it's wild how quickly it's happened.
But I'm just thinking the ads breaks were a chance to get up, go to the toilet and to actually sort of get bit moving, not sedentary. We went,
we were like, tell me when it's back on, and you'd run to the bathroom or go get snacks. And
so it actually encouraged a bit of movement whilst we were watching TV, whereas now there's no, well, you can obviously choose not to have ads. So I'm just thinking because when you mentioned that morning, wake up in the morning, we're still coming out of a sleepy state, and our brain waves are quite low, and I'm thinking that phone is stimulus to really take it up to the more faster beta waves and really start start getting it to tick over. And in terms of this intuition, to me it sounds like it's more connected with slower waves and
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think it's really interesting because I was so interested in what's the difference between intuition and fear. Because when I had been in a couple of sort of emotionally abusive relationships, so when I was dating again, I was quite anxious it was going to happen again. And so I was really curious as like, when is my intuition talking and when is it my fear talking? And what I learned through that kind of answers your question is that the intuition came in such a quiet way that that's why we need to sort of get away from the noise of the world and get into a quiet place and sort of listen. And so that's why it's hard to access it if we're constantly on. So just to kind of close the loop on the fear versus the intuition thing, the fear is like, don't do that, don't do that. It's very panicked, it's very rushing, and it almost feels like social media, right? So the intuition, definitely, you need to kind of get to a place where that's why, when you're in the shower and you have those great ideas or you're driving the car, because all that stimulus has kind of been removed. So it's very more from a slower place, more from a quieter place. It's not pushy. It's not going to be kind of telling you, oh, you got to do this. It feels very much like, I think a lot of people can relate to getting those bright ideas in the shower. It feels more like that. Oh, where did that come from? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, I'm relating it to what I now do in the morning and how much it's helping me. So I wake up and I just go down, like I walk down to the beach. I'm,
Mhm.
fortunate that I'm only 10 minutes from, or 10, 15 minutes from the water. And so I do that walk down to the beach, and all I can hear is bird sounds. And so
Mm.
again, those nature sounds, everything's sort of, more slow and less busy. You're not hearing all these horns and cars
Yes.
revving their engines and racing past me. It's
Yes.
all the birds are just chirping and talking away, and I walk down with my daughter. We're just having a nice slow conversation. It's just
Mm.
whatever. It's sort of like you're just in the moment sort of conversation. It's not
Yep.
like going through days, because you've just woken up. We've got nothing really to. It's not like how was your day. It's sort of
Yes.
how you're feeling and how was your sleep, and
Yeah.
and
So
so
you're even doing that kind of check-in, but with another person, which is so fine too. Yeah. How are you
yeah,
feeling? How did you sleep? And
yeah,
then it's prompting that reflection. So maybe, to your earlier question, how could someone do it? Having a journal prompt that's like, how am I feeling? So
mm,
it's like someone else is asking you the question, but
mm.
it's just that prompt to remind you to check in.
And that's when I've done the body scan, I found that's like, if because I find people sort of get asked that question like, how are you, and people just have an automatic response
Mm,
because they're so, like, they're in that sort of high stimulus state, and it's just automated response, and
yeah.
they're not actually checking in. There's no
No.
reflection. It's just a quick response. It's sort
Yeah.
of not like doing a body scan. How am I actually feeling? Like,
Yes.
like, do I feel tense? Do I feel a bit emotional? Do I feel sad? Like it. And I can relate to doing like the body scan meditation, is like you're checking in with each element of your body and just sort of asking that question of that particular part of the body.
Yeah.
And I found
Yeah.
that can be really helpful. Like just like just checking in, like, as you mentioned, like, is it tight,
Yeah. Where
tense
is it?
shoulders? Yeah, where is it? Like,
Yeah. And then interestingly, like the next step can be, and why?
hmm,
Why, as you said, you're communicating with the body. Oh, why is my lower back feeling tight? And then it's quite curious, it would be a whole separate podcast, but there's the book, The Body Keeps a Score, and it talks about sort of where we have these stored memories. And he worked with veterans that had come back from the war and trying to understand. So the body is always trying to communicate with us. But as you said, we don't listen. It's sort of very automatic. We don't actually check in. And the other thing you said was great too, I think, for the listeners, that you can sort of do a meditation where you're outward scanning. So not outward scanning on our phone, or hopefully not in traffic or something like that. But you can sort of just sit in your room and work with the senses. So what's three things that I can see? What's three things that I can hear? Can I taste anything? Can I smell anything? For people that have very busy minds, sometimes that inner reflection, or people that are more hyper vigilant and maybe hyper aware of what's going on in their body, and that causes anxiety. So just to give the listeners an alternative, you can kind of do that thing where it's like, what's some gentle things in my environment? As you said, the birds. Oh, what's that bird? I wonder what that bird is. I know my nephew's all about the birds at the moment. So yeah, what are the different sounds? Or you could sit and watch traffic, red car, blue car. You know, there's other ways we can do it.
Yeah, because it just sort of reminds me of like when you're consulting and helping people tap into their intuitive guidance, part of your process must be at the very early start. It's just to calm them down, right? It's just to bring them down, because I can imagine people have just gone from one appointment, they're rushing to see you, and
Yep.
they've probably got something next. And so you'd spend that. Is this how you go about really helping them tap into that intuitiveness? Yep.
Yeah. And it's I'm lucky that in the very beginning of me starting to do with this work one-on-one with people, I also went and did meditation teacher training. And I'm so glad it did, because it kind of just complemented itself. And I naturally had to come to that realization that, wow, like people are coming to me with a goal, you know, I want a healthier relationship or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, we've got to put a pin in that for a second, because generally, if you want this goal, we need to understand what's happened in your past and something that needs healing. But before we can do that, we need to create safety and security right now. And in order to do that, we need to kind of, calm everything down. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got to kind of start with that. So that's what I always say to people. Like, if you can start with one of those sort of techniques and start to calm yourself down, it is the quickest way to get to your goals. Because I think a lot of people are goal driven. I'm goal driven. There's no problem with it. But really, we can't just kind of keep going at stuff without doing that inner work. I don't believe. Eventually, it just sort of falls into a heap, you know.
Yeah, 100%. Like I'm sort of picturing that Maslow hierarchy of needs, and like
Yeah.
you get them to the foundation's got to be there before we can transcend up the pyramid.
Yeah.
So you got to make the client feel very safe and secure in that space,
Yes.
so that they can really start to tap into how they're feeling. And so when someone they've calmed themselves down, and they sort of notice that we'll pick the shoulders, that they're sort of a bit tense in the shoulders, and you said you got to ask, why am I feeling tense in the shoulders? And so what's that process of questioning? Is it just asking why and why and why?
Yeah. It's really funny, because I guess it does sound like it sounds like, how would that even work, But it is really interesting that if we can kind of get to that quiet place and we're curious and we go, okay, my shoulders are tense, and this is going to probably be gradual, right? So when we might get some stuff right away, we might not. But if you tune in and you go, okay, my shoulders are tense, why? You might have an image pop into your mind. You might have a memory. You might just hear something, work. Okay, what is it about work? And so you're just following the thread. And I truly believe that people can do this and develop it over time. People might think it sounds like impossible, but it's just because they've never tried it. So we can absolutely just start to tune into our body and get more curious, and it's about following that thread. And why. My background's actually in marketing, and it's actually a technique we use, I think, in sort of consumer behavior marketing. But there's a technique where you keep asking why. It's the same thing. Yeah.
It's very much what the kids do, right? The kids keep asking why. Why is that? Why is that?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is that? And they're really getting down to the underlying foundation, or the bottom of the iceberg. Yes, yeah. And it's interesting as we go through life that we think we know, or we get less curious. And I was just thinking, when you're saying, like, go with what pops up and follow that thread, I'm thinking, in today's world, we might overthink that thing. Oh no, it can't be that. It can't,
Yes.
but where's what you're saying? It is the first thing that pops up, is it? Is that?
Yeah. That's also starting to build that trust as well, because you're like, oh, that popped up. I'm just going to trust that means something. what could it mean? So it's, even in meditation, we say childlike curiosity, which is funny that you said that, because it is kind of coming with things like, oh, what could that mean? Why did that kind of pop up? Okay, I'm going to be open to that being what it is. Because it's funny, because even with the work I do, very much some people go, if I go, oh, I feel like there's something related to your dad here. No, I don't think so. And then over time we can kind of get to that. But if we come with that resistance right away, the goal is to have that curiosity and the openness, and that's kind of how we can kind of follow that thread.
And that just what popped for me then was probably why they resisted or not want to run with it is that they've constantly that's how they deal with it. They keep blocking it, whereas the intuition's trying to keep bringing it up and to tell you, I need this to be sorted. You need, in order to really heal and grow, I need you to sort this. And they keep getting the sense or whatever it is, and they're going, oh no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. It's too traumatic. Is that what you find?
And it reminds me so much of when I was younger. I used to watch Oprah in my lunch breaks, and I remember this episode where and I don't know if it was about intuition but it was about sort of getting these sort of signs, but she said that, whatever, I don't remember the terminology she used, but something will be trying to tell you something, or the universe will be or the intuition will be trying to tell you something. And at first it will come as a feather, and then it might come as a bag of flour, and then it might come as whatever. Don't wait until it's a bus, and I've certainly had those experiences. We talked about relationships before, where it's like, I would have had red flags early on with things, and you go, oh, no. And you just sort of keep ignoring things. And I think if people can get that curiosity earlier on, you don't need to wait for things to get sort of really obvious and unfortunately not going to be totally pleasant. We can kind of go, oh, maybe it is about that, or maybe there is something going on there.
Yeah, so that's probably a telltale sign if, one of the listeners are sort of getting those, hopefully it's the feather moment,
feathers,
right?
Yeah.
The nice little gentle touches and not being whacked by a bus. But but certainly if they're resisting, going with it and following that thread, because they're too scared of where that thread might lead, that's a perfect, I guess, cue to reach out to Louise, right? To say, to really help them through that block that they've got, that resistance. And because I can imagine, as you mentioned earlier, the body holding the score it's just staying there and it's blocked. And
And you've picked up on two things there, right? So one of them being, if it does feel a little bit scary, we never want to push something so much, particularly if it's like a trauma. And remembering from the beginning, traumas don't have to be big and obvious. It can feel too scary to touch that thing. So that's why we want to build the safety and capacity that I talked about. That's why we want to build that first. But it's also like, we might need someone to help guide us through it. And that's where I would come in. But I think that people can often sit with something or ignore something because it feels too difficult. But trust me when I say that it is way more difficult to live with this thing for the rest of your life, because it is affecting us whether we're aware of it or not. So, I said that example from the beginning of like, it can be the reason you're not getting a promotion and getting the money you want at work. It absolutely can be affecting you. Something that happened to you way back then that you don't want to deal with can absolutely be affecting you now. So as scary as it can seem to go, I don't want to look at that, your life is going to feel easier and happier and healthier when you do.
Yeah, because you brought up that earlier example about your personal situation where you had those not so great relationships, but that could have really stopped you moving forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because I think after the last one, I was like, I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life. And that's not a good, like, that's not good either. Do you know what I mean? So, and I could have gone on some dates and gone, oh my gosh, this is freaking me out. I don't want to deal with, why was I attracted to this kind of person? And when I unpeeled all of that and healed the past and understood it, I could have a completely different future. And cut to, I am now, I'm married, and there's a cat behind me, I think you can see, and everything completely changed. So yeah, you're right. I could have continued to date the same kind of person because I didn't want to deal with something, or I could have been alone forever, or so that is a perfect example of how dealing with this stuff seems scary, but the end result's way better.
Yeah. The thing that popped into my mind when you mentioned that is what we resist persists, and I'm thinking you'll keep running into that guy that you.
Yep. You do though, and that's a really, really good thing too. If the listeners are sort of things are coming up, what are the repeating patterns? Why does this keep happening? Because that's what I was asking. Why do I keep attracting this kind of person? Or why do I keep getting overlooked for promotions? Like, if we see these repeating patterns, that's often a sign that we need to dig a little bit deeper. Yeah.
And so I'm just intrigued how you apply the process to, because emotional abuse in relationships is, makes you feel really insecure.
Yeah.
Extremely insecure. And as you said, I just didn't want to date again. I just wanted to be by myself, and I felt a lot safer with myself. Would you mind sharing as to how you work through that? Because it's not as if it's not uncommon. Yeah.
And sadly, you're right. Sadly, it's not uncommon. I sort of came to realize it's great now. People are talking about it a lot more, and there's a lot more awareness about it. My personal experience through it, I would say that there was 3 people I could point to that fit the bill. 3's not great, that I obviously had to repeat it that many times. And unfortunately, I think it was sort of got to a situation where it was so bad that it was like, again, it was like, you've got to listen this time. So that got me to the point where I was like, maybe swinging the other way. I'm not going to do this again. But that's where I got curious, and I was like, okay, why do I keep going to this person? And I had to do some inner work and understand some things from my own past and what it was within me that felt like I was pulling in that kind of person. And this is absolutely not to victim blame. I need to be totally clear about that, because there are absolutely people out there that will just pick someone that they can manipulate or do whatever they want to. But there was parts about me that I was I could have exited it, or in the future I did go on a date and I did see a red flag and I went into a panic going, oh my God, it's happening again. But then I went, hang on, no, it's not. You're aware that it's happening. So I think that there was a level of me not being conscious. So that's where we want to bring these things from the past to our conscious awareness, because once we're conscious of them, we can choose a different path. And not to say it's easy, and getting through this is quite a complex answer, but it was basically like bringing it to the conscious awareness so I could choose differently. So when I was on a date and I was seeing that same kind of person popping up, I could choose not to see them again, which sounds so simple maybe for people listening. But I did go into a panic going, oh my God, it's happening again. And it was like, oh, hang on, no, it's not. You've only been on one date. So even if someone dated someone again and it was like 3 months, that would be better than maybe a year or 3 years. So it's making those gradual changes in our lives so that we're gravitating towards those situations less often, doing the inner work. So in this case, it was like building up a sense of self-worth again and all of those kinds of things, which I also did through going into like hobbies and activities and building up community and all of those kinds of things, and talking to people in my life about it so they were aware that it had happened, so that I also had someone to chat to and say, hey, do you think this is a normal thing for someone to say? Because my radar was a little bit off. So yeah, it's a pretty complex answer, but I think that there's more help out there now than maybe there was when I went through it, more awareness of the other ways that it can happen. It's not just physical. But yeah, that's the shortest answer I can give. I think.
It's very helpful, because the thing that's come up for me is this whole thing of when people say, I can't meditate, I can't sit with my thoughts, I go crazy. And I'm thinking it's because they don't want to deal with something, right? Because when you start to slow down, that thing that keeps not, starts as a feather and eventually hits you as a bus, as Oprah Winfrey described. But that is what they're essentially trying to avoid, is they keep busy and stay busy in order to shut out that intuition, that intuitive guidance that's telling them something. And so they maintain this hyper busyness and keep like they running from something.
Yeah. And that's really, and you made me think of something there, but that can be definitely like avoidance, what we sort of label avoidance behavior. There's a really interesting thing if we go back to that sort of fight or flight scenario, whereby if we have something that we're scared of and we avoid it, our anxiety increases and our confidence decreases. When we have something that we face a fear, our anxiety decreases and our confidence increases. So let's use an example from my life. I was scared I was going to end up in the same kind of situation. And so I could have not gone on dates because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. But I went on dates and some of them were fine. But then when I had to face the fear of like, oh my gosh, I think this person I'm on a date with is the same kind of character, I was facing the fear and I was able to come out of the anxiety cycle about it because I had faced it. My confidence increased and my anxiety decreased. And so I think if anyone's listening and they're sort of sitting with something or sitting with avoiding something, I don't want to look at this, please know that the anxiety around it is there and it only increases the longer that we avoid something. And this is why I say your life will get better, because literally your confidence will get better. You'll realize that you can handle it. You do have the skills to handle it and you can move forward past it. And you'll feel so much better in yourself than you do. And it's just baby steps. We don't, there's even exposure therapy, right? Which is well known for phobias. So I'll use phobias because people will understand it. But if you were scared of spiders, maybe, then you would watch your level out of 10 for seeing a spider in front of you, right? Then we can rate some other scenarios where we can build up to that. So let's say it's seeing a spider on a computer screen is a 2. So then every day we can just look at pictures and we're slowly building up to seeing one in real life, right? We can apply this to the difficulties or the fears we have in life. So let's say in life, I have a fear of going on dates. You could start by, well, let's rate out of 10 some activities that could get you to that point. Let's say signing up for a dating app, just signing up is a 2. So let's just sign up. Okay, so then you can just sit with that for a little while. So when people think about facing their fears, they think about diving into the back of the ocean. We're just trying to slowly walk from the sand to the shore to get into our ankles and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's also exposure therapy in a nutshell. But
it's really insightful because I'm just relating it to the cold bars or, when people do a cold plunge is like some people will slowly step into it, and feel it and think, it's cold, but I'm doing all right. And then they'll do another small step and think, okay, that wasn't too bad. And they really just allow themselves to slowly go into that uncomfortableness. But then you get others that go straight in and then they get this huge hit, and they just can't handle it and they're running out again, it's as you said, that more gradual approach and just acknowledging as you're taking that gradual approach is, I'm okay, I'm safe.
Yes.
I'm not going to die. Whereas I think when you do that big plunge, you just get overwhelmed.
Yes. Well, that's literally like trauma therapy in a nutshell is we don't want to actually dive straight into the tricky thing. We gradually want to approach it and keep coming back. It's like pendulation of looking at it a little bit, coming back to safety, going in a little bit further, coming back to safety. So that's why if we can build that safety within, it gives us that soft place to land to be able to go and heal these things.
Yeah, I really like that approach because it's that, as you said, if you're stepping forward into that uncomfortableness, but then be able to realize that I'm okay, my life's not under threat. Yep. And therefore I'm willing to take another step. And as you said, each step you take, you build confidence and you get more reassurance and your self-esteem builds up. And so, and when you were mentioning that, like if we're avoiding something, that's, we're anxious about, we're actually still running from it. Like, so we're,
Yes. Yep.
yeah.
Yep. We're still stuck in that flight. Like if you talk
Yes.
about the fight or flight, we're in constant flight. We're running from something that happened to us in whenever. And even just to give people another example, because I think I really want to drive home that these traumas, these difficulties don't have to be really obvious. When I was in school, I'm pretty short. You can't tell here, but I'm 5'1", right? Well, because you've met me in real life. So I wasn't picked on sporting teams, and when I was on sporting teams, I was benched a lot, and I wasn't given much time. And this happened no matter what sport I played. And so I really had sort of childhood beliefs formed around me and exercise and not being strong. I'm really tiny, I'm really weak. And so that was really driven into me from childhood. So this is just to give people an example how, yes, that can directly relate to me and sport as an adult. So what I believe about sport as a direct line, but it also forms some beliefs around you are weak, you are small, you are not strong. So just to give people an idea of like, it doesn't have to be these big things, but what's something that happened to us when we're forming our brain? What are we learning about ourselves from the outside world? And so these are the things that we can start to unpack and see how would me believing that I'm weak or small or not strong, how would that apply in my career? How would that apply in my relationship? So we can really start to unpack it. Yeah. And challenge it.
Because as you mentioned, if we don't deal with it, it sort of compounds and affects it affects our life going forward. And just going back to that earlier example about I think it was the leopard and the impala, and
yes,
you mentioned like the impala escapes and it acknowledges that they've got free and they're safe, and what they do is do that body shake to so the body doesn't hold the score. It's sort of, it's flushing all the stress out of the body and allows that impala to then go and graze. Whereas you can imagine, like after a life-threatening situation and trying to eat, but they've got that third space where they shake the body off and switch on the parasympathetic nervous system to keep eating, to keep surviving. And I'm finding we don't just allow that threat to continue and
keep
to
running,
compound, and therefore we just keep running, and it affects our digestive health, it affects our immune system, and as you mentioned, our can result in chronic diseases. So
it definitely does. And I always think of ducks, because I always saw ducks. If people have seen ducks, they're always fighting. I don't know why, but on ponds they're always fighting, but they always go and shake after it. So if you're sort of seeing ducks out in the wild, you'll see that they do it. And I think the difference is with us that we have these inbuilt things to calm our nervous system, but a lot of them we just sort of, like, we're not going to start shaking in the office, but we probably should. So we can go into the bathroom and we can do it, or we can hum, or we can sing, or it's just building in those things so that we're not in constant flight. And when there's those bigger things, like you said, so I'm not running from a sporting event that I did in, when I was 12 years old. I'm still not running from that when I'm 38 years old. We need to resolve it.
It's so true, because that impala is acknowledging it, making it consciously aware, but then also acknowledging that it's safe, and then just pushing anything it's holding out of the body through the it's just and so it's processing what's just happened. Whereas I think we sort of have that stimulus, and then we just don't deal with it. We keep running from it, and we're not dealing with it.
And even those little things like the emails throughout the day are just like further reminders. Oh, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. That can be connected to something that happened so long ago. So that's why if we can kind of create the safety and capacity in the present and then process the past memory, it's gold.
Fantastic. So how can the listeners, that are thinking, wow, I could do with a bit of this guidance, how can they best connect with you, Louise?
So I've got my website, louisefitzgerald.com.au. I've also got my Instagram at Louise Fitzgerald .com.au. It's not complicated. I just keep it the same. And generally, I sort of help people with a few different streams. So people can see me for like, if they've got general life stuff like this, they don't know where to start. I've got the intuitive guidance sessions. And then I work with people in relationships. So if you're single or you're in a relationship and you want to kind of work through this stuff to create healthy relationships. And I also do work with fertility and pregnancy clients as well. So helping people increase their chances of getting pregnant, and then also the stress of pregnancy. And it's all got this sort of underlying thing of doing the inner work, the safety and capacity, the stress, the nervous system regulation. It all plays a part to help people get those outcomes.
Yeah, because the body doesn't have the capacity to reproduce when it's running away from something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, again, that'd be a whole nother podcast,
Yeah.
But it's that chronic stress and the nervous system regulation if we don't feel safe. So yeah, a lot can be done in that space.
Absolutely. And to the listeners, I'll include all those links that Louise mentioned in the show notes, so you can go directly to the show notes and reach out and connect with Louise. And my final question, Louise, is what's your intuitive guidance about this podcast episode?
I had a great time. I could chat to you all day, but yeah, this is the trouble, isn't it? But I know we've got to get on with our days. But yeah, it was really great, and I hope there were some takeaways for the people listening.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot for me, and I can guarantee a lot for the listeners. And so thank you so much, Louise, for coming on and sharing your insights. And to the listeners, thank you for continuing to support the show and continue to health up.
Thank you.